The bolt cutter on my north fence snapped at 5:47 a.m. on a Saturday in May, and I heard it from my back porch with a coffee mug halfway to my mouth. I set the mug down. I walked out onto the gravel drive in the pre-dawn gray. Tatum Sinclair stood on my own pasture in a quilted white vest and pearl earrings, supervising 8 men in tactical polos and a fleet of ATVs unloading tents and surveying tripods onto my grandfather's land. She turned at my boots on the gravel. She smiled the way a woman smiles when she has been practicing for 2 years.
Mr. Pemberton, good morning. The Sweetgrass Hollow community has decided to exercise its prescriptive easement rights to our creek access. We'll be here documenting use for the next 60 days.
I looked at the family land my grandfather had bought in 1924. She didn't know. She didn't know I had been sworn in, 11 days earlier, as Montana's new Secretary of State. She didn't know my first order of business in that job was going to be her. What would you do if your HOA cut your fence and stormed your ranch at dawn? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. My name's Garrett Pemberton. I'm 56. I was sworn in last month as the Montana Secretary of State, and the ranch I came home to that Saturday morning was a place my grandfather had bought 101 years earlier with the savings of an Army cavalry pension. The grandfather was Lieutenant Garrison Pemberton. He had ridden out of Fort McGinnis in 1884 with the 2nd Cavalry, mustered out in 1898, married a Lewiston rancher's daughter named Caroline, and spent the next 26 years saving every spare dollar to buy land of his own. In 1924, he closed on 2,400 acres of grass and limestone along Big Spring Creek in Fergus County, central Montana, the geographic dead center of the state. He named the place the Pemberton Ranch. My father, William, born in the front bedroom of the ranch house in 1941, has lived on it ever since. My father is 84 now. He still walks the south pasture every morning. He still knows every cow by name. He still drinks his coffee black at 5:15 sharp, the way his father did. He smells like saddle leather and the small Honduran cigar he allows himself one of every Sunday afternoon after church. I left the ranch when I was 18 for the University of Montana in Missoula, then for law school in Bozeman. I started as a county prosecutor in Lewistown at 26. I ran for state district court judge at 31 and spent the next 25 years on the bench, mostly civil cases. 8 years ago, I lost my wife, Edith, to acute leukemia. Edith had been a small animal veterinarian. She had hung her shingle on Main Street in Lewistown the year we got married, in 1995, and her clinic had been the place every Fergus County kid took their sick puppy for 20 years. She died in our living room on the ranch on a Thursday afternoon in May, with the lilacs blooming outside the window, holding the hand of our then 14-year-old daughter, Marin. Marin is 22 now. She is in her 3rd year of vet school at Colorado State. She plans on graduation to come home to Lewiston and quietly reopen her mother's clinic. She told me this for the first time when she was 16, sitting on the back porch of the ranch house in her mother's old barn coat. I have not, since that conversation, asked her again. I have not needed to. The ranch house itself sits on a slight rise above Big Spring Creek. It is a 2-story timber frame my grandfather and his brother built by hand in 1926, with a stone foundation, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen window that faces sunrise. My father has, in 84 years, slept in the same upstairs bedroom every night of his life that he has spent in the state of Montana. He says the bedroom is older than he is, and he sees no good reason to demote it. 3 months ago, the previous Montana Secretary of State resigned over an unrelated personal scandal. The governor called me. He asked if I would consider stepping off the bench and into the appointment, with full confirmation in the legislature, for the remaining 18 months of the term, plus an election option after that. I said yes. The state Senate confirmed me 11 days before that Saturday morning. My swearing in had been a quiet, private ceremony in the governor's office. The formal Capitol press conference was scheduled for the following Monday. I had not, deliberately, told anyone in Fergus County about the appointment yet. I had wanted one quiet weekend on the ranch with my father before the new job began. Adjacent to our north fence, beginning about a quarter-mile from the ranch house, sat Sweetgrass Hollow Estates. 52 luxury ranchette homes on 5 to 10 acre lots, built between 2019 and 2022, marketed to wealthy buyers from Bozeman, Jackson Hole, and Aspen. Average home value $4 million. HOA dues $24,000 a year. The community had been developed by a Connecticut transplant named Carlton Sinclair, who had bought 800 adjacent acres in 2018. His wife, Tatum Sinclair, had served as HOA president from the day the first home closed. For 2 years, the Sinclairs had been quietly attempting to acquire 300 acres of Pemberton land along Big Spring Creek. My father had refused them in writing 4 times. The Sinclairs had not taken the refusal well. On a Saturday in May, at 5:47 in the morning, Tatum Sinclair brought her refusal of our refusal to my fence line with a bolt cutter. The 8 men in tactical polos were a private security crew from a company called Sentinel Range Security, based in Bozeman. Tatum had hired them, she informed me with the bright, cheerful smile of a woman entirely confident in her position, to ensure the safety of the community during the documented exercise of our easement rights. I stood at the fence line in my Carhartt jacket and my Sunday boots. I did not raise my voice. I did not pull out my phone. I did not in any visible way do anything except listen. She kept talking. There was, she explained, a clear precedent in Montana law for prescriptive easement by continuous use. If the Sweetgrass Hollow community could document 60 consecutive days of use of the creek section for community recreation, they could establish a claim that would regularize the long-standing dispute. I asked her, calmly, who their counsel was. She said it was an attorney out of Billings named Lauren Whitcomb. I made a small mental note. I had presided 10 years earlier over a fraud trial in which a man named Lauren Whitcomb had testified for the defense and had been, by my finding, not credible. I said, Mrs. Sinclair, I would like you and your crew to immediately stop unloading equipment and to gather every item you have placed on this property. You will then escort the entire group back through the cut fence. I will give you 60 minutes. She did not stop smiling. Mr. Pemberton, we are not going anywhere. We have a notice of easement claim filed with the Fergus County Recorder Tuesday. Until that notice is adjudicated, we have presumptive standing. Mrs. Sinclair, a notice of easement claim is not a court order. It is a piece of letterhead. Your standing on this land is trespass. 60 minutes. I turned around. I walked back to the house. My father William was standing in the kitchen doorway, in his pajamas and slippers, holding a coffee cup with both hands. He had heard most of it through the open back door. His face was the color it got when a calf got into the highway. Daddy, go put on your boots. I need you to drive into town to the sheriff's office. Bring back Drew McCready in person. Do not call. Drive. Garrett, should I bring... No, Daddy. No firearms. Just Drew. He looked at me a long moment. Then he set his coffee down, put on his Wranglers and his boots, and was out the door in 8 minutes flat. I called my attorney Bethany Llewellyn in Lewistown. Bethany had handled my mother's estate in 2019 and my wife's in 2018. She answered on the 3rd ring. I gave her the situation in 2 minutes. She said, Garrett, take photographs, take video, get a witness statement from your father when he comes back with Drew. Do not, under any circumstances, leave the property today. I will be at the ranch by 9 a.m. I went back outside. Tatum Sinclair was now sitting in a folding camp chair, sipping coffee from a thermos. Her crew had not stopped working. They were now staking out 8 tents and the campfire pit, with a fresh wooden sign that read Sweetgrass Hollow Community Easement, Documentation Site, staked into my grandfather's pasture, about 4 feet from the creek bank. I stood at the corner of the fence and recorded video, slowly, deliberately, for 16 minutes. I narrated time and date and observed activity. I named the 8 security men I could read the badges of. I photographed the bolt-cut fence. I photographed the cleat marks of the ATV tires across the wildflowers my mother had planted the year before she died. Sheriff Drew McCready arrived in his cruiser at 7:14 a.m., followed by my father in his truck. Drew got out, shook my hand, and walked the fence line with me in silence for 10 minutes. When we got back to the trespass site, he said in his slow, careful Drew McCready voice, "Mrs. Sinclair, I'd like you and your group to please return all property to the public side of the fence by 8 a.m. and not return." "Sheriff, we have a recorded notice of easement claim." "Mrs. Sinclair, the notice is a civil filing. Mr. Pemberton's deed is registered to this parcel and has been since 1924. As of right now, you are committing criminal trespass and destruction of property. I am asking nicely. The next conversation will involve cuffs." She stood up. Her smile for the first time slipped. She gathered her crew. They struck the camp. They walked back through the cut fence. Tatum, from the public side of the line, turned and looked at me with eyes that had decided I was a problem. Drew McCready stayed for another 40 minutes. He photographed the cut fence at every angle. He took statements from the 2 security men who, when asked, admitted they had no Montana operating license and had been told the property was uncontested. He wrote down their company's name and phone number. He gave my father his cell number and told him to call any time, day or night. He shook my hand and drove off. My father and I stood at the cut fence with our coffee getting cold in our hands. He said, "Garrett, they will be back." "Yes, Daddy, they will." "How long do we have?" I looked at the wildflowers crushed under the ATV tracks. I looked at the white wooden sign Tatum had left behind, knocked sideways into the dirt, that still read documentation site. "About 4 days, Daddy, maybe 5. The lawsuit was hand-delivered to my father's ranch house on Tuesday morning by a process server out of Lewistown. My father took the envelope at the front door, walked it into the kitchen, set it on the table beside my coffee, and said, "Garrett, they're serious." I opened it. The complaint was 43 pages. It alleged that the Pemberton Ranch had, by my father's selfish obstruction of the Sweetgrass Hollow community, interfered with the lawful prescriptive easement rights of 52 homeowners. It sought, as relief, judicial recognition of the easement, $2 million in damages for delayed quality of life enjoyment, and a court order requiring my father and me to permanently allow community access to the creek frontage. The complaint was signed by Lauren Whitcomb, attorney for the Sweetgrass Hollow Estates HOA. Attached as exhibits were 3 separate filings the Sinclairs had quietly made over the previous 14 months with the Fergus County Zoning Office. The first alleged that my grandfather's 1928 barn was a non-conforming structure in violation of current setback ordinances. The second alleged that my mother's wildflower garden was an unmaintained, noxious weed harborage. The third alleged that my father's 20-year-old farm tractor, which he occasionally drives at 4 miles an hour down the public road to my uncle's place, constitutes habitual disruption of community traffic patterns. I read the complaint twice. I noticed 3 things. The first thing I noticed was that the complaint cited no actual easement deed. There was no recorded easement. There never had been one. The second thing I noticed was that the complaint was riddled with errors of Montana property law that no actual attorney would have made unless he was either drunk or hoping to settle quickly. Lauren Whitcomb, I would later learn, was both. The third thing I noticed was the date stamp on the zoning complaints. All 3 had been filed within the past 6 weeks. Someone at Sweetgrass Hollow had been quietly building a paper trail of harassment against my 84-year-old father. Bethany called me at 11. "Garrett, this is malicious civil litigation. We will file a motion to dismiss with prejudice by Friday, attached to a counterclaim for tortious interference with property rights and intentional infliction of emotional distress on a vulnerable adult." Vulnerable adult is my father, Garrett. Your father is 84. Montana law has a specific elder abuse civil remedy. We will use it. "Bethany, there's something I need to tell you." "About my new position," I told her. She was quiet a long beat. Garrett Pemberton. Are you telling me you were sworn in as Montana Secretary of State 11 days ago, and your formal Capitol press conference is on Monday? Yes, and the Sinclairs do not know. She was quiet a longer beat. Garrett, let me think about this for a few hours. Then we are going to have a strategy conversation. She hung up. My father came in from the south pasture at noon. He took off his hat. He sat down at the kitchen island. He read the first page of the complaint. He set it down. Son, 40 years ago, when you were a boy, the original Sinclair, Carlton's father, Harold Sinclair, tried to buy this ranch from your grandmother. He told her it would be a kindness for a widow to liquidate. She told him to leave her porch. He told her he could make trouble for her at the county. She told him to leave her porch a second time. He left. He never came back. Daddy, this Carlton is the son. The Sinclairs have, in 3 generations, tried to take this land from 3 generations of Pembertons. I want you to remember that when you decide what to do. I looked at my father across the kitchen island. He was 84 years old. He had pale blue eyes I recognized from photographs of his own father. Daddy, I'm going to do exactly what needs to be done. I want you to leave the worrying to me. He nodded. He stood up. He went to check the south pasture again. The humiliation of my father came on Thursday afternoon. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m., my father and 5 other Fergus County ranchers in their 70s and 80s meet at Mountainside Coffee on Lewistown's Main Street for 90 minutes of coffee and small lies about whose calf weights were better. They have done this since 1991. The owner, a woman named Helene Brockway, keeps the back corner table reserved for them on principle. My father came home from coffee that Thursday at 12:30 instead of 12. He came in the back door. He did not say hello. He walked through the kitchen, into the den, and sat down in his armchair without taking off his hat. I excused myself from a phone call with Bethany and walked into the den. He did not look up. Garrett. Tatum Sinclair came into the coffee shop today with 3 of her HOA board friends. They sat at the next table over from us. They were loud, on purpose. She said, loud enough for Helene to hear and for all of us to hear, quote, "The Pembertons are a family of selfish hicks who have been holding back this county for 100 years, and it is time somebody told them so to their face," end quote. I sat very still. Then she walked over to our table. She put her hands on the back of Henry Reedstrom's chair. Henry is my age. She said, quote, "You boys need to tell your friend William that his weekend judge son is not going to save him. The Sinclairs are going to take that creek. The smart move is to settle now, before the sheriff has to start arresting your grandchildren for trespass." I sat in the den a long time. The afternoon light from the west window moved across the rug. Daddy, did she really say that? She did. Henry sat there with his mouth open. He's been my friend since 1956. Helene Brockway came out from behind the counter and asked Tatum to leave. Tatum laughed at her. They left after about 10 more minutes. My father, then, did something I had only seen him do twice in my life. Once when his own father died in 1991. Once when my mother died in 2019. He took off his hat. He put both hands over his face, and he cried. I do not have words for what that did to me. I will not try. I sat in the chair across from him. After about 3 minutes, he wiped his face with his bandana. He sat up straight. Garrett, Henry Reedstrom is going to forgive me for what she said in front of him. He'll come around by Tuesday. I am worried about how this woman thinks she gets to talk to old men in a coffee shop on Main Street in our town. I am too. Then do something about it, son. The proper way. Not the angry way. The way your mother would have done it. The way your grandfather did with the original Sinclair. Yes, sir. He stood up. He went back outside to check the south pasture. He stayed out there until sundown. I went into my study. I called Bethany. I told her exactly what Tatum had said in the coffee shop. Bethany was quiet a beat. Garrett. That is intentional infliction of emotional distress on an elder, witnessed, with corroborating testimony from a coffee shop owner. That is also defamation per se against the Pemberton family. We are adding both to the counterclaim. I want sworn statements from every man at that table and from Helene Brockway by Saturday afternoon. Bethany. I also want to make a phone call to Helena, to the Office of the Attorney General, specifically to Howell Brennan in the Consumer Protection Division. She was quiet, a longer beat. Garrett, are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting? I am suggesting that on Monday morning at my Capitol press conference, when I am formally sworn in as Montana's Secretary of State, I would like to have a complete file on every fraud the Sinclairs have committed against the Pemberton family and against the 52 homeowners they have been overcharging for 6 years. Garrett, make the call. I picked up the phone and dialed the Helena office of the Montana Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Howell Brennan answered on the second ring. Howell Brennan, who had been the lead consumer protection prosecutor in Helena for 16 years, listened to my 18-minute summary without interrupting. When I was done, he said, Garrett, 2 things. 1. I have been waiting for someone to file a serious complaint against Sweetgrass Hollow Estates for 2 years. We have 3 open files. Nothing complete enough to charge until now. 2. Welcome to Helena, Mr. Secretary. I am at your disposal. By Friday afternoon, his office had pulled every corporate filing the Sweetgrass Hollow Estates HOA had ever made with the Secretary of State's office. They had subpoenaed the Sinclair's Development Company records. They had pulled 5 years of HOA dues collections and bank statements. They had subpoenaed Carlton Sinclair's federal tax filings on the disputed Creek Common area he had claimed as an infrastructure asset on his investor prospectus. Howell sent me a single PDF Friday at 5:14 p.m. 41 pages. The cover sheet was titled, simply, Pemberton Findings. I read it, sitting at my kitchen island with a glass of bourbon. The HOA's 2019 incorporation filing contained a fraudulent meets and bounds description of the community boundary, drafted by Carlton Sinclair's own development office, that explicitly included a 300-acre swath of land registered since 1924 to my family. The filing had been notarized by a man named Stanley Pierce, who had been Carlton Sinclair's college roommate and was, by Howell's check of state records, not actually a notary commissioned in Montana. The HOA's annual financial reports, every year since 2019, had described the disputed 300 acres as designated open space common area and had assessed prorated dues against the 52 homeowners accordingly. Over 6 years, that fraudulent assessment had brought in approximately $700,000 in dues collected on land the HOA did not own. The Sinclair's Development Company had filed federal tax statements claiming the same 300 acres as a depreciable infrastructure asset, generating tax write-offs of approximately $180,000. Carlton Sinclair's investor prospectus listed the disputed 300 acres as collateral for a $2 million construction loan that had been issued by a Billings bank. Tatum Sinclair's private security company, Sentinel Range Security, was not licensed in Montana. The company's owner of record was Tatum Sinclair's brother-in-law. Most importantly, under Montana Code Annotated Section 35-2-727, the Montana Secretary of State has explicit statutory authority to issue an order of administrative dissolution against any nonprofit corporation incorporated in Montana that was procured by fraud, has engaged in conduct beyond authorized scope, has failed to maintain accurate corporate records, or has engaged in patterns of consumer harm. I would, in 72 hours, be the Montana Secretary of State. I had been planning for my first day in office to give a brief speech about modernizing the office's online services for small Montana businesses. I had a draft of the speech in my briefcase. It was perfectly fine. It was, in light of Howell's PDF, no longer the right speech. I closed the PDF. I sat at the kitchen island a long minute. The west window looked out over the south pasture, where my father was driving his old Ford tractor at 4 miles an hour, cutting hay in the late afternoon light. He had been doing the same thing in roughly the same place on roughly the same tractor since 1968. He did not yet know what was in the PDF on my laptop. He would by Monday morning know the part of it that mattered. I called Howell back at 6:30 p.m. Howell, two things. 1. Draft an order of administrative dissolution for the Sweetgrass Hollow Estates HOA, citing every finding in your file. Number it 2026-001. 2. Draft criminal referral packages to the AG, recommending charges of corporate fraud, wire fraud, federal tax fraud, false notarization, unlicensed private security operations, elder abuse, and tortious interference against both Carlton Sinclair and Tatum Sinclair personally. Have everything on my desk in the Capitol office by Monday at 6:30 a.m. Garrett, you are aware that you are about to make a real public splash. Howell, I am aware that an elderly Montana rancher sat in a Lewistown coffee shop on Thursday with his hat in his hands and cried about a Connecticut transplant who insulted him in front of his lifelong friends. The splash is fine. Howell was quiet a beat. Yes, sir. Monday at 6:30. I did not, between Friday evening and Monday morning, do anything dramatic. I read briefing books. I took my father out to dinner Saturday night at the steakhouse in Lewiston. I drove to Helena on Sunday afternoon and stayed in my official secretary's apartment 3 blocks from the Capitol. I called Marin in Fort Collins to wish her good luck on her Wednesday vet school exam. She did not yet know what I had agreed to do Monday morning. She is a careful child. She does not need things to worry about that I have already handled. I rewrote my Monday speech. The original was about modernizing online business services. The revised speech was about something different. I worked on it from 7 p.m. Sunday until 1 a.m. Monday at the small kitchen table of the Helena apartment. I drank 1 glass of bourbon. I revised 11 times. I printed 3 copies. Bethany Llewellyn drove up from Lewiston Sunday night with my father in the passenger seat. They stayed in a hotel downtown. My father wore his Sunday suit. Bethany wore her Navy court suit. They both came to the Capitol at 8:30 Monday morning. Howell Brennan met me at 6:30 a.m. sharp at the Secretary of State's suite on the 3rd floor of the Capitol. The order of administrative dissolution was sitting in a leather portfolio on the conference table. 43 pages, including the index of findings, the cited statutory authority, and the schedule of fraudulent acts. The signature page was the last page, blank, waiting. The criminal referral package was a second portfolio, 80 pages, also signature ready. I sat down at the conference table. I read the dissolution order, line by line. Howell sat across from me and answered 6 questions. When I was done reading, I picked up the silver fountain pen that the previous Secretary of State had left in the desk drawer, the pen the Office of the Secretary of State has used to sign formal orders since 1971, and I signed the order. I dated it. I sealed it with the office seal. I handed it back to Howell. Howell, hold this until 9:42 a.m. exactly. At 9:42, walk it out the south door of the Capitol, get in the state car, and drive it 3 blocks to the conference room where the Sinclairs are sitting at the Montana Real Estate Investment Summit at the Northern Hotel. Hand it personally to Carlton Sinclair. Read him his rights regarding the criminal referral while you are at it. Howell smiled a small, quiet smile. Yes, sir. 9:42 it is. I had not, until that moment, smiled in 72 hours. I let myself smile. Meanwhile, the press conference logistics were in motion. I had asked the governor's communications office to please make sure the local Lewistown NBC affiliate, the Helena Independent Record, the Billings Gazette, and the Associated Press Helena Bureau were all confirmed for the 9 a.m. press conference. I had requested a live video feed broadcast to the State Capitol channel, which is carried, ironically, in every Montana hotel lobby, including the Northern Hotel's conference center, where the Real Estate Investment Summit was being held. The Sinclairs would, between 9 and 9:42 a.m., be watching the press conference on a flat-screen TV in their summit conference room while drinking complimentary coffee. By 9:42, they would understand exactly what was about to walk through the door. Now I have to back up, because between Thursday's coffee shop incident and Monday's press conference, Tatum and Carlton Sinclair were not, themselves, sitting quietly. They were escalating in real time, and not knowing what they were escalating into. Friday morning, Tatum posted a long Facebook post on the Sweetgrass Hollow community page, titled, "Standing Up to Selfish Obstruction." The post called my father, by name, a stubborn old man hiding behind his weekend judge son, who is now hiding behind expensive Lewistown lawyers. It called me, by name, a coward who would rather see Montana stay stuck in the 1920s than allow modern families enjoyment of their community. The post received 82 comments before it was screen captured by Bethany's paralegal and added to the counterclaim file. Friday afternoon, Carlton Sinclair drove out to my father's ranch in his Range Rover. My father was on the porch. Carlton got out, walked up the driveway, and handed my father a manila envelope. The envelope contained a personal check for $50,000, made out to William Pemberton, with a handwritten note from Carlton that read, quote, "William, I think we can resolve this man to man. This is a sincere offer to acquire your family's interest in the creek section. We will not pursue you further. We will resolve this quietly. Best regards, Carlton." End quote. My father read the note. He read the check. He looked at Carlton Sinclair. "Carlton, your daddy tried this on my mother in 1985. Your granddaddy tried this on my granddad in 1928. You're the third Sinclair to try this. You're going to be the last." He tore up the check. He let the pieces fall onto the porch boards. He walked back to his rocking chair. He sat down. He picked up his coffee. Carlton stood on the porch for a long moment. He did not speak. He turned. He walked back to the Range Rover. He drove away. My father called me at 4:14 p.m. He told me in 11 sentences exactly what had just happened. He had memorized the note. He had photographed the check pieces. "Daddy, you did everything exactly right." "I know I did, son." He thought I was a rancher. I am a rancher. He should not have come up the porch steps. I forwarded the call, with my father's permission, to Howell Brennan's investigator. Saturday morning, Tatum hired a PR firm out of Bozeman. The PR firm placed 2 op-eds in the Billings Gazette opinion section on Sunday morning. The first op-ed, signed by Tatum, was titled, "Why Modern Communities Need Modern Access to Public Resources." The second op-ed, signed by a concerned Sweetgrass Hollow resident named Brenda Whitlow, later revealed to be Tatum's own sister-in-law, was titled, "It is Time for the Pembertons to Stop Holding Back Our County." Both op-eds appeared in print on Monday morning, the same morning as my Capitol press conference. The Billings Gazette would by Tuesday run a full-page apology and retraction. The PR firm would by Wednesday formally fire the Sinclairs as clients. Sunday afternoon, Tatum hosted an emergency HOA board meeting at the Sweetgrass Hollow clubhouse. She announced a special assessment of $8,000 per household, totaling $416,000, to fund expanded legal and security operations in defense of community easement rights. 6 of the 12 board members objected. 2 walked out. Tatum pushed the vote through with her remaining 4 loyalists. By Monday morning at 8:45 a.m., as I was preparing to walk into the press conference, Tatum's inbox was already full of homeowners furious about the $416,000 assessment. 2 of those furious homeowners had, that morning, already retained the same attorney Bethany Llewellyn had recommended. The walls were closing in. The Sinclairs did not know. By 9 a.m. Monday, Carlton and Tatum were seated at a corner table at the Northern Hotel's 3rd-floor conference center, drinking complimentary coffee, watching the Montana State Capitol channel begin to broadcast the live press conference for the new Secretary of State. I walked into the press conference room at 9:01 a.m. The room was the formal press chamber on the 2nd floor of the Capitol, the same room where governors give State of the State addresses. 43 reporters and 12 TV cameras were seated in folding chairs. The governor was in the front row, in a navy suit. Bethany Llewellyn was in the 2nd row. My father, William, was in the 3rd row, in his Sunday suit and string tie, holding his grandfather's pocket watch in his right hand. I stepped to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I waited a moment for the room to quiet. "Good morning. My name is Garrett Pemberton. I was sworn in 11 days ago by the governor as Montana's 24th Secretary of State, filling the vacancy created by the resignation of the previous office holder. Today is my first official day in office. Before I outline my priorities for the next 18 months, I would like to introduce two people in the front rows. The Honorable Governor of Montana, who appointed me, and my father, William Pemberton, who is 84 years old and who taught me, by example, every important lesson I have ever learned about Montana, including the lesson that we do not, in this state, run people off their own land. The room was already quiet. It got quieter. In Montana, the Secretary of State holds 5 core constitutional responsibilities. Today, I will speak briefly about one of them, the integrity of corporate registration in this state. The office of the Secretary of State is the registrar of every corporation, partnership, and nonprofit organization incorporated under Montana law. We are the chartering officer of Montana's small businesses, its family farms, its churches, its volunteer fire departments, its little leagues, and its homeowners associations. I paused. I took a sip of water. With that authority comes a statutory duty, articulated in Montana Code Annotated Section 35-2-727, to act when a corporation incorporated under Montana law has been procured by fraud, has acted beyond its lawful scope, has falsified its records, or has engaged in patterns of consumer harm. When such findings are documented, the Secretary of State has the authority and the obligation to issue an order of administrative dissolution. I am exercising that authority today, effective immediately. I lifted the portfolio onto the podium. Order number 2026-001 of the Office of the Secretary of State of Montana administratively dissolves the corporate registration of Sweetgrass Hollow Estates Homeowners Association, Incorporated, of Fergus County, Montana. The order is based on documented findings of fraudulent incorporation by reference to land legally owned by a third party, ultra-vires assessment of dues against fraudulently claimed common areas, falsified notarization by a non-commissioned notary, 6 years of consumer harm to 52 member households, and direct intentional infliction of emotional distress against an elder member of the Fergus County community. The room did not breathe. The order takes effect upon service, which is occurring at this moment at the Northern Hotel, 3 blocks from this building. The Sweetgrass Hollow Estates HOA's authority to operate, assess dues, or take any official action is suspended. A court-appointed receiver will, in the next 90 days, oversee the orderly reorganization of the 52 homeowner residences into a new homeowners association under bylaws that do not include the fraudulent boundary claim. I held up one hand. 2 more items. First, my office has, in cooperation with the Office of the Montana Attorney General, prepared a criminal referral package against Mr. and Mrs. Carlton Sinclair. The referral recommends charges of corporate fraud, federal wire fraud, federal tax fraud, false notarization, unlicensed private security operations, elder abuse, and tortious interference with property rights. Second, the Office of the Secretary of State will, beginning today, undertake a comprehensive review of every homeowners association corporate registration filed in Montana since 2018. Any HOA found to have engaged in similar conduct will be subject to the same statutory remedy. I closed the portfolio. Sweetgrass Hollow's residents are not at fault for what was done to them by Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair. Their homes are theirs. Their neighborhood remains, and my father, who is sitting in the 3rd row, will continue to drink his coffee on the back porch of a ranch his grandfather purchased in 1924, free of disturbance, for whatever years he has remaining. My father, in the 3rd row, lifted his grandfather's pocket watch slightly. He nodded once. I will take 3 questions. The room exploded with hands. I took 3 questions. They were the right 3 questions. The first reporter, from the Billings Gazette, asked whether I had any conflict of interest given that my own family was the alleged third-party landowner. I said yes. That is why every finding in the order was independently established by the Office of the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, under the direction of Special Investigator Howell Brennan, who has spent 30 years on this work. I have signed an order based on his independent investigation. I have not investigated my own case. The second reporter, from the Lewistown News Argus, asked whether my father William was available for comment. I said, "He is available. He is sitting in the third row. He will, however, take only one question." The reporter looked at my father. My father stood up. He said, "Son, what do you want to ask me?" "Mr. Pemberton, what does it mean to you that this order has been signed today?" My father stood in the press chamber of the Montana State Capitol in his Sunday suit, holding his grandfather's pocket watch, and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that was steadier than I had heard it in months, "Son, it means my granddaddy can rest. He bought the ranch in 1924 with the savings of an army pension. He held it through the Depression. He held it through the war. My daddy held it after him. I held it after my daddy. My son is holding it now. The Sinclair family has tried, in 3 generations, to take it from us. Today, the state of Montana told them no on behalf of all of us. That is what it means to me." He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the reporters, every one of them, started writing. The third reporter, from the Associated Press, asked whether the Sinclairs had been advised in advance of the dissolution order. I said no. They are being advised at this moment. I checked my watch. It was 9:41 a.m. I stepped away from the podium. 3 blocks away, at the Northern Hotel 3rd floor conference center, Carlton and Tatum Sinclair were watching the Capitol Channel live on the flat screen. According to multiple eyewitness accounts later collected by reporters, what happened next was as follows. At 9, when I began speaking, Tatum had been chatting with a real estate broker from Jackson Hole at the coffee station. She returned to the table. At 9:04, when I introduced my father, Tatum said, audibly, "Wait, is that the same Pemberton?" At 9:06, when I said, "The lesson that we do not in this state run people off their own land," Carlton set his coffee cup down very carefully. At 9:09, when I said Sweetgrass Hollow Estates Homeowners Association Incorporated of Fergus County, Montana, Tatum stood up. She did not finish standing. She sat back down. At 9:14, when I described the criminal referral, Carlton turned to Tatum and said, audibly, "Tatum, he's the Secretary of State. He has been the Secretary of State." Tatum did not respond. At 9:39 a.m., Special Investigator Howell Brennan walked through the front door of the Northern Hotel's 3rd floor conference room, accompanied by 2 Montana Highway Patrol officers and the state court process server. He crossed the room to the Sinclair's corner table. He laid the first portfolio on the table. He laid the second portfolio next to it. He read Carlton and Tatum their rights regarding the criminal referral. A photographer from the Helena Independent Record, who had been covering the summit for other reasons, and had been quietly following the unfolding situation, took the photograph that would, by Tuesday morning, appear above the fold on the front page of every Montana newspaper and on the Associated Press wire. The photograph showed Tatum Sinclair, in her quilted vest and pearl earrings, with her right hand flat on the table, her mouth slightly open, looking at the order of administrative dissolution lying in front of her. She had, finally, run out of smile. Back at the Capitol, I walked out of the press chamber, down the marble corridor, and into the small conference room where my father and Bethany Llewellyn were waiting. My father was standing at the window looking out at the Helena skyline. He turned when I came in. He did not say anything. He walked across the room. He put both arms around me. He held me for a long moment. When he stepped back, he said, in the steady voice he had used Thursday afternoon in the den, "Garrett, your grandmother would have laughed her head off. Your mother would have cried. I am doing a little of both." I had not in 56 years hugged my father in a public building. I was glad we had finally crossed that line. I held his shoulder. I said, "Daddy, let's go get lunch." We walked out the south door of the Capitol together. The Helena sun was warm. The reporters were still in the rotunda. The order of administrative dissolution was, by then, 3 blocks away on a corner table at the Northern Hotel. We had lunch at a diner on 6th Avenue. My father ordered a hot turkey sandwich. I ordered coffee and a slice of pie. We did not talk much. We did not need to. 6 months later, on a cool October afternoon, I sat on the back porch of the ranch with my father and watched my daughter Marin examine a yearling calf in the south pasture. Marin had graduated from Colorado State 3 weeks earlier with her doctor of veterinary medicine and had moved home that weekend. She had reopened her mother Edith's old clinic on Main Street in Lewistown on October 1st. The clinic had, in its first week, served 41 Fergus County families. Helene Brockway at Mountainside Coffee had sent over 12 dozen sticky buns and a handwritten card. Carlton and Tatum Sinclair were indicted in June on federal mail fraud, federal wire fraud, federal tax fraud, and Montana state corporate fraud, false notarization, unlicensed contracting, elder abuse, and tortious interference. They accepted plea deals in September. 5 years federal custody for Carlton, 3 for Tatum, full restitution of approximately $700,000 to the 52 Sweetgrass Hollow homeowners, $240,000 to my father personally for tortious interference and elder abuse damages, and permanent ban from Montana real estate development and HOA service. Lauren Whitcomb was suspended from the practice of law in Montana for 18 months. Stanley Pierce, the unlicensed notary, accepted a plea on 3 counts of false notarization. Sentinel Range Security was permanently barred from operating in the state. The 52 homeowners of Sweetgrass Hollow reorganized, with the help of the court-appointed receiver, into a new homeowners association called Sweetgrass Hollow Residents Cooperative. The new HOA's bylaws are 14 pages long, plain English. Dues dropped 53%. The new president is a retired Bozeman geologist named Eulalie Forsberg, who lives on Lot 14 and who, it turns out, had been quietly waiting 6 years to swing that gavel. 3 of the Sweetgrass Hollow homeowners wrote my father personal letters of apology for not pushing back against the Sinclairs sooner. My father wrote back to all 3. He invited each of them out to the ranch for coffee. 2 of them came. The third was 81 years old, and his wife drove him. They had a long talk on the back porch. My father walked them down to the creek and showed them his granddad's original survey marker. We founded 2 things. The first is the William Pemberton Conservation Easement. 1,800 acres of the Pemberton Ranch placed, by recorded deed in August, into a permanent conservation easement managed by the Montana Land Reliance. The land cannot be developed. The land cannot be subdivided. The easement names my father, who is now 85, and runs in perpetuity in his honor. We had a small ceremony at the creek. Marin was there. Bethany was there. My father said 3 sentences. The third sentence was, quote, "My granddaddy can finally rest," end quote. The second is the Edith Pemberton Veterinary Scholarship, established at Montana State University. $5,000 a year to a Fergus County student entering pre-veterinary studies, in memory of Marin's mother and my late wife. The first recipient is a 16-year-old girl named Rachel Wexler, whose late father had been a Fergus County rancher. Marin and I drove down to deliver the award in person. Rachel cried. So did Marin. I am still the Secretary of State. I will be standing for election in 8 months. I have not yet decided whether I will run for a full term. My father, on a recent porch evening with bourbon, told me he hopes I will. I am thinking about it. The office has, in 9 months, dissolved 6 other HOAs across the state for the same pattern. 2 more files are open. Howell Brennan was promoted in July. The governor sent me a handwritten note on his personal stationery that read simply, "Garrett, keep going. The state is grateful." I do not, in my official capacity, undertake personal grudges. The Sweetgrass Hollow case was not a personal grudge. It was a state office doing the duty the legislature wrote into its statutes. Here is what I learned. Land remembers. Families remember. And the Montana State Code, when read carefully by a man whose father was crying in his armchair on a Thursday afternoon, contains exactly the tools a citizen needs. If you have ever had your own HOA story, drop it in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories like this, hit subscribe. Stay rooted. Stay watching. I'll see you on the next one.
That Swiss grass hollow. Tatum's skin glare didn't fall because Gareth saw it. She fell because his grandfather had bought a ranch in 1924 with the savings of an army's pension, and because 3 generations of Pemberton had held that ground long enough for one of them to grow up, go to law school, become a state district judge, get appointed Secretary of State, and quietly read Montana Code Annotated Section 35-2727 on a Friday afternoon. Patient and stated with any HOA's peer errors every time. The real risk wasn't the indictment or the dissolved corporation. It was an 84-year-old ranger named William finally getting to walk 3 apologetic Swiss grass hollow neighbors down to his grandfather's creek and show them the survey marker. It was a vet school graduate named Maureen opening her mother a clinic on Main Street to lives of Vegas Catholic families. It was a coffee shop owner named Helen Broadway getting to keep her back corner table reserved for the right man, on the right principle, for another 20 years. If you ever had a Tatum, drop the story in the comments. I read every one. If this is what you need at the end of a long week, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Next week, we head to a small Vermont ski town where naturally tried to find a single mom out of her late father had built a frame and ran into the unpaid bill collector she didn't know she left behind. See you there.